This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The Palestinian Prime Minister, Salam Fayyad, inspected the headquarters of the security agency in Ramallah to avoid a security breakdown similar to what had happened in the Gaza Strip. Fayyad's inspection came after he met with a number of Arab and foreign diplomats, during which he discussed the emergency government's agenda, the financial difficulties it is facing, as well as the security and development of the Palestinian Security Agency. This report by Khalid Qasim from Ramallah.
Security preoccupies the minds of the members of the emergency government who are running out of time. However, the government has at least collected the weapons from the Palestinian streets and lifted the morale of the Palestinian Security Agency after it was dissolved in the Gaza Strip.
Certainly during this phase, we have a duty to be sharp and guarantee that what happened in the Gaza Strip does not reoccur in the West Bank. This is an essential undertaking. We must ensure that this is implemented in detail. The security plan is defined by its mission and its needs and priorities. We must also define what is needed to guarantee the success of this plan. This is what we are doing at this time. However, the main reason for this inspection is to provide security for Palestinian citizens.
The
Palestinian security forces have always guaranteed Palestinian people's aspirations for stability, liberation, and the creation for the Palestinian state. This is more the case since the events in Gaza.
Palestinians are not the only ones preoccupied with the collection of weapons, especially from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, which is affiliated with Fateh. It appears that this was also the topic of discussions today between the Palestinian government, Arab and foreign diplomats.
The issue of security was also very important. We discussed the details and accomplishments made by the Palestinian Authority, the government, and the Ministry of Interior during the past few days. In the end, we hope to guarantee security, law and order, and not to allow the events of Gaza to be transferred to the West Bank. Later, we want to return the rule of law to the Gaza Strip.
This Palestinian emergency government, more than any previous government, understands that its success or its failure is linked to containing the security breakdown, so it is not used as a justification for the collapse of the security regime in the West Bank. Security has led to the failure of most Palestinian governments, which have been unable to find an answer for, a scenario which the emergency government is trying to avoid. At least it has been able to achieve what previous governments have failed to, keeping weapons in the hands of the security forces. From the police headquarters in Ramallah, Khalid Al-Qasim, Al-Arabiya.
The ousted Palestinian Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh welcomed Egypt's invitation to participate in an inner Palestinian dialogue. He reiterated that he is prepared to have discussions with other Palestinian factions.
We welcomed the invitation by the Honorable President Mohammed Hosni Mubarak to our Palestinian people to engage our inter-Palestinian dialogue. We believe that this invitation stems from awareness and understanding of the complexities of Palestinian politics, which can only be resolved through dialogue. We have showed that we are prepared to participate in this dialogue immediately.
The number 2 man in Al-Qaeda, Ayman alZawahri, said that the Egyptian regime was about to send thousands of fighters to Gaza before Hamas took control over it. alZawahri voiced his support for Hamas, but he also demanded that it changes its path.
The Egyptian regime supports Abbas with weapons and has been training thousands of fighters for him. 5,000 of them were about to enter Gaza to eradicate Hamas before it had taken control over it. The Arab foreign ministers met at a surprising speed in Cairo to legitimize Abu Mazen and condemn the criminal acts that took place in Gaza. We say to our Mujahideen brothers in Hamas, we and the entire Muslim nation are with you, but you must correct your path.
Joining us, Dr. Riya Rashwan, an expert on Islamic groups. Dr. Dia, what's the significance of alZawahri's speech?
In reality, this 20 minutes long speech focused a great deal on two things. First, alZawahri attacked what he labeled as the nationalistic and leftist regimes that lost Jerusalem 40 years ago. He started his speech by talking about the 40th anniversary of losing Jerusalem in 1967. Second, he talked about the importance of supporting Hamas. This time, alZawahri addressed Hamas in a different manner. Several times in the past, he had attacked it. This time, however, he referred to Hamas members as our Mujahideen brothers. Then, he called for supporting Hamas against what he referred to as the Arab and Palestinian collaborators, as well as the Crusader-Jewish alliance. He also called on Hamas to implement the Islamic Sharia law in Gaza and to form an alliance with other Mujahideen in Palestine. alZawahri had criticized Hamas when it entered the democratic process and participated in the Palestinian Authority, as well as when it accepted international and Arab resolutions pertaining to the Palestinian plight. However, he said that this does not mean that Al-Qaeda and what he called al-Mujahideen all over the world should not support Hamas. In fact, he said that supporting Hamas in Gaza is the religious duty of the neighboring countries and regions.
alZawahri named certain Arab countries and said that they were training forces and that these forces were about to be sent to Gaza to eliminate Hamas. To what extent was this accurate, or was it only for public consumption?
What I understood from alZawahri's statements is that Egypt was providing weapons and training to the Palestinian forces. He probably was referring to the 5,000 Palestinian forces that were present in Egypt and that they were about to be sent to Gaza. In any case, I do not think that the Egyptian government would have allowed the Egyptian forces to enter Gaza. Yes, Cairo supported and still supports Fateh, but it also has kept communication channels open with Hamas. I do not think that the Egyptian government could have afforded crossing the red line by sending Egyptian forces to Gaza, whether this had happened before or after the crisis.
Don't you think that alZawahri's speech and his verbal support to Hamas puts an additional burden on Hamas, especially after President Mahmoud Abbas had accused it of trying to form a backward Islamic state?
لا شك في هذا. خطاب الظواهري يأتي لكي يضيف كما ذكرت أنت عبئا جديدا على حماس.
Yes, without a doubt. As you have said, alZawahri's speech puts an additional burden on Hamas and puts it under suspicion. Historically, Hamas, just like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, did not agree with alZawahri's school of thought. This explains why alZawahri has attacked Hamas and what he called its conduct in his past speeches, especially after Hamas had won the Palestinian parliamentary elections in 2006. Therefore, this speech will only give the wrong impression about Hamas. Hamas, which has disassociated itself from alZawahri on several occasions, will do the same today. It will explain that it has nothing to do with alZawahri. In reality, Hamas does not want to form an Islamic state, and it does not believe in alZawahri's school of thought. I think that alZawahri is using what is happening in the Palestinian territories to further escalate the situation. He is also trying to attract some of the angry men in Palestine and the region were unhappy with what happened to Hamas despite the concessions that it made. alZawahri is trying to promote his jihadi school of thought to these men. I think that Hamas has nothing to do with this school of thought, and I believe that it will confirm this in the near future. Sharm el-Sheikh summit ended yesterday. It was a summit with different messages, but with one title, Hamas. The Israeli Prime Minister took advantage of the summit to confirm his dejection to negotiate with Hamas and announced the release of prisoners from the Fateh movement only. Meanwhile, the Egyptian president brought back a glimmer of hope by calling on the two Palestinian factions to return to the negotiation table. Hamas's spokesman welcomed this call, but he did not hold back from criticizing President Mahmoud Abbas. We leave you with Zuhair Saqallah in Gaza.
The Sharm el-Sheikh summit has ended and everyone has returned home. Everyone left with the impression that they should remain committed to talking about Hamas's policies and what it had done. Olmert refused to negotiate with Hamas. Mubarak called on Fateh and Hamas to negotiate, and Abbas insisted on keeping the doors of negotiations with Hamas closed.
Olmert policy is to divide and conquer. He came to Sharm el-Sheikh to deepen the division between President Abbas and Hamas.
Olmert surprised the Arab leaders, including Abbas, by releasing prisoners only from Fateh. This, of course, was not received well by Hamas.
It is the right of all Palestinian political prisoners to enjoy freedom, and we welcome the release of all Palestinians. What the Israelis did was a cheap shot, and the Palestinian people will not buy it.
Egypt, which has spent a great deal of time and effort to mediate between Fateh and Hamas, called on the two conflicting brothers to put their differences aside and to reopen a dialogue, hoping that the crisis will create the will to reconcile. This was the only call that was well received by Hamas, who now controls Gaza at the military and administrative levels. Hamas welcomed a new dialogue with Fateh.
Fateh and Hamas were divorced from each other as organizations. However, they must sit down on the negotiation table.
Sharm el-Sheikh summit ended with recommendations that did not leave much of an impact on the views of Gaza's residents. The summit seemed to strengthen their views that such summits are rarely successful and that actions must be accompanied by actions, especially when it comes to ending the starvation of the Palestinians and ending the siege. Zuhair Saqallah, Dubai Television, Gaza.
The Egyptian president who hosted Sharm el-Sheikh summit carried his mission by holding sideline meetings. The individuals who were attending these meetings were sometimes preoccupied with talking to each other, and at other times they were smiling for the cameras. It seems that the comfortable environment has had a positive result on a meeting between Olmert and Abbas, who were warmly and respectfully received. The summit's main objective was to rebuild bridges of confidence between the conflicting parties to pave the way for peace negotiations.
I urge my peace partner, Ohud Elmert, to begin serious peace negotiations and a timetable for establishing an independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital that will live in peace side by side with its neighbor, the State of Israel.
Abbas's call for partnership was welcomed by Israel.
In a gesture of goodwill towards the Palestinians, I proposed to the Ministerial Cabinet that we release 250 prisoners from the Fateh movement who were not involved in bloody operations. These prisoners must pledge not to get involved in terrorism again.
This good gesture comes as the Palestinians are going through an internal crisis. Therefore, this summit has created several implications. The main implication is that these leaders have met to support Mahmoud Abbas while putting aside, at least temporarily, the internal Palestinian dialogue and leaving behind the starving Palestinians.
Abducted IDF Corporal Gilad Shalit is still suffering from wounds sustained when he was kidnapped a year ago and is being held in conditions that are not suitable for proper treatment. This according to a senior Hamas official who disputed Fateh sources that claimed Shalit was only lightly wounded. And in related news, Israeli defense officials said the audio tape released yesterday by Hamas is apparently authentic. IBA's Eli Wagalanter has that story.
אמא ואבא, אחותי ואחי, חבריי בצה"ל. אני מוסר לכם מתוך הכלא דרישת שלום ואת געגועי לכולכם.
The audio tape released yesterday of abducted IBL Corporal Gilad Shalit is authentic and was recorded recently. This according to a senior defense official who added that the release of the tape is a sign of Hamas's weakness and that the fact that the organization is taking responsibility for Shalit's health is a positive sign. Shalit's father, Noam, agreed, saying he hoped that the release of the tape on the first anniversary of his son's abductions would lead to his son's release.
I would like to believe that this tape that the Hamas released today, it's a sign that they are willing to expedite the negotiations regarding the exchange deal of Gilad and Palestinian prisoners, and not a media spin that they would like to release due to the Sharm Convention.
Meanwhile, the political fallout from the release of the tape continued to be felt today. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak said that Egypt's security delegation will return to the Gaza Strip as soon as the situation calms down and will then resume negotiations for Shalit's release. In an exclusive interview with Yediot Achronot, Mubarak added that, quote, there were rumors that Iran or Syria torpedoed the deal to release Shalit. Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni criticized Hamas yesterday for making what she called a cynical use of Gilad Shalit's suffering to further its own agenda.
I think that Hamas use a very cynical use of the suffering of Gilad Shalit, the pain of his family, the pain of the people of Israel, in order to dictate its own brutal agenda in the region.
A senior official in the Prime Minister's office said that the release of the tape would not change Israel's policy regarding Hamas. Eli Wagalanter, IBA News.
It was a national day of mourning in Spain today as it received the bodies of 6 soldiers killed when their UNIFIL armored personnel carrier was bombed on Sunday. The UN mission vowed to pursue its mission in southern Lebanon despite the attack.
The bodies of 6 soldiers serving with Spanish UN forces killed in a Sunday bombing in Lebanon arrived back home in Spain in the early hours of Tuesday to a somber reception at Torrejón Air Base outside Madrid. King Juan Carlos decreed an official day of mourning for Tuesday when flags were from midnight flying at half-mast from all public buildings ahead of the soldiers' funeral this morning at the Parachute Regiment's base just outside Madrid. The king will be unable to attend the state funeral himself for the fallen 6 as he is on an official visit to China. But Defense Minister José Antonio Alonso, who attended a religious ceremony in Lebanon on Monday afternoon before the men's remains were repatriated, was to attend the funeral. Alonso also oversaw a ceremony at the Spanish regiment's base, decorating the 6 with UN service medals before the flight back to Madrid. The 6 were killed on Sunday when a bomb struck their armed personnel carrier as they patrolled the main road between the towns of Marja Ayoun and Khiem in southern Lebanon. 2 other Spanish soldiers were seriously injured as a result of the blast, the first deadly attack on the UN's peacekeeping force in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL, since last year's war between Israel and Hezbollah. Nobody has claimed responsibility for the bombing, which Alonso said was premeditated. As the ceremony in Lebanon was coming to an end, UNIFIL troops with sniffer dogs combed fields near the site of the blast for clues. Conflicting reports said the 40-50-gram bomb had been detonated by remote control or by a suicide driver. The UN Security Council condemned the terrorist attack and reaffirmed its support to the Lebanese government and army. The UN peacekeepers vowed they will pursue their mission in the south despite the car bomb. Spain has deployed nearly 1,100 troops to southeastern Lebanon, near the border with Israel, as part of the UNIFIL, which has little over 13,000 soldiers from 30 countries. UNIFIL has now suffered 266 fatalities since it was set up after a 1978 Israeli invasion.
Tony Blair will be charged with bolstering efforts to find a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. In this special programme, we'll be asking if Tony Blair is the right man for the job, or is his reputation tainted after taking the lead in the Iraq War? I'm Lauren Taylor, this is Al Jazeera. Hello. One day before he leaves the top job in the UK, the outgoing British Prime Minister Tony Blair is set to be charged with bolstering prospects for a possible peace deal in the Middle East. When his new role as peace envoy to the Middle East Quartet is formally announced, his remit will include improving economic development in the Palestinian territories and helping to build up the institutions of a future Palestinian state. But the odds may be stacked against Blair. There's a question mark over his ability to win Arab support after taking a leading role in the Iraq War with President Bush. He's perceived as a supporter of the US and by association a supporter of Israel. In this special programme, we'll examine whether he's likely to get a warm welcome across the Middle East. Well, the quartet held a meeting in Jerusalem a few hours ago to thrash out the details of his remit, and our correspondent David Chater joins us from there live now. David.
Lauren, essentially this post has been unoccupied now for more than a year. Since the election, in fact, of Hamas last year, the post has been largely sidelined. So Tony Blair is being fitted up for a job at the moment, which is going to be a very, very difficult one, because unlike the last occupant, he faces a situation where there's not only a geographic split between the West Bank and Gaza, but now, as we've seen, a political split as well. He has several things on his CV which will give him a great advantage. His micromanagement skills and in finding a resolution to what was seen as an intractable conflict in Northern Ireland will aid him greatly in this task. But also it has to be said that in the Arab world, the fact that he stood shoulder to shoulder with George Bush in the invasion of Iraq, and also last year during the Second Lebanon War, failed to condemn the bombing of Hezbollah in both Beirut and southern Lebanon, and didn't ask for an early ceasefire, both those things will count against him in the Arab and the Palestinian camp. But I think in the end, this is a role that's almost designed for him as he steps down as British Prime Minister tomorrow, because he's always said that solving this problem, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, will be the centre and the key to unlocking a new Middle East. And that is perhaps what his legacy. Back to you, Lauren.
David, thank you very much indeed. Well, in a moment, we'll be speaking to Said Zidani, who's a political analyst in Ramallah. And from Tel Aviv, we're joined by Ranan Gissin, who was an advisor to the former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. But first, Alan Fisher has this report on the uphill task facing the outgoing British Premier.
Tony Blair has been meeting California's governor in Downing Street to talk climate change, but he gave this hint: he may be about to accept one of the toughest jobs in the world.
Anybody who cares about greater peace and stability in the world knows that a lasting and enduring resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian issue is essential. And as I've said on many occasions, I would do whatever I could to help such a resolution come about.
As Al Jazeera exclusively revealed last week, the outgoing British Prime Minister is expected to be named the quartet's new envoy to the Middle East. Some would argue he made his first pitch for the job at a G8 meeting in July last year.
It's only if it's, if she's got or if she needs the crown prepared, as it were. Because obviously if she goes out, she's got to succeed, as it were, whereas I can go out and just talk. See, the irony is that what they need.
Now, after 10 years in the top job in the UK, it's almost certain he'll be given the task of finding a peace deal in the Middle East. But there will be grassroots anger because of his support for the war in Iraq.
This kind of problems is not actually solved by the masses, not solved by public opinion makers. It's usually solved behind closed doors. If you think of the Oslo Agreement, it's actually solved behind closed doors. And Tony Blair is a very, very good salesman.
So what would be on a Tony Blair's to-do list? It's thought the first thing would be to get the quartet to strengthen Palestinian President Abbas as much as possible. Then it's thought he may call an international conference which will include the quartet, Israel, the Palestinians and the Arab quartet of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Jordan. On the agenda is likely to be final status issues dealing with Palestinian and Israeli demands, and then finally connect the whole Palestinian-Israeli issue to the wider Middle East. Tony Blair has had success bringing peace to Northern Ireland, but that took more than 10 years of effort and hit many problems along the way. Until now, his engagement in the Middle East has been dominated by what happened in Iraq. Perhaps he sees this new role as a chance to redeem himself, but that may only happen if he brokers a lasting settlement. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, London.
In the French capital of Paris, a conference on Darfur ended without resulting in a final statement or a clear agreement by the participating countries. China's special envoy to Darfur, Liu Guojin, said that his country believes that pressuring Sudan is not beneficial and will further complicate the matter. He called on the international community to make immediate efforts to help the peace process in the region. The Sudanese government, which boycotted the conference, said that such platforms have distracted from current efforts to come to a political solution in Darfur. It should be noted that the African Union Working Group for Peace in Darfur was not invited to attend the conference. Members of the Sudanese National Assembly commented on the Paris conference and on its timing. The Sudanese government and the African Union are calling for strengthening current resolution mechanisms rather than creating different platforms, reiterating that such conferences complicate the situation and do not serve the peace process in Darfur.
The conference that was being held in the past few days is an interference in Sudanese affairs and sovereignty. Sudan negotiated with the United Nations and the African Union and came to an agreement. The world has witnessed that Sudan had a balanced position in accepting the multilateral operation. Thus, we do not see a need for these kinds of conferences which attempt to interfere in Sudan by using international measures.
عبر إجراءات دولية أنا أرى أنه هذا المؤتمر كان يفترض أنه يعقد.
This conference was held at an inappropriate time and place because there are already many initiatives that have emerged domestically. The first Vice President, Salva Kiir Mayardit, now has an initiative to gather the conflicting fronts in Darfur.
We in Sudan are committed to what we agreed to in Addis Ababa. We have nothing to do with what happened in Paris. This was an intrusion and an unjustified meddling in Sudanese affairs. We are also committed to working with the international community. However, this international community must be organized.
I believe that the Paris conference was not in the interest of Sudan. The increased number of initiatives and conferences on Sudan relating to Darfur usually has a negative effect because they are an interference and do not benefit the Sudanese people. I think that this conference in its current format and composition is not intended to honestly debate or resolve the issue in Darfur.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.